Welcome back to another episode with PixMWeb. In this episode, we're going to go over the different types of data that PHP can work with. Alright, so in a previous episode, we've talked about strings. So strings are, strings of text that you write out. So they're basically words. So let's look at an example here. You always have to open up your PHP tags, and we're going to create a variable x. We're going to assign that variable the value of a string. So welcome to this episode. Okay, and then we're going to, we're going to put in the semicolon to finish off that statement. Alright, so we have the variable and we have the string inside as the value of that variable. This string right here, everything in between the quotation marks is the string itself. And it could be a double quotation marks or single. And we spoke about the difference in the previous episode, hence why I typically go with the double quotes. Alright, so that's a string, and we already know how to display that on the browser. We echo the string out. We could just do echo x. And of course we have to finish that off like that. We could save that. Alright, so now let's go here to our browser. And in the browser, since I created the file types.php, always remember to use .php, we have to make sure we have that in the URL. So let's refresh that, and you see it outputs the welcome to this episode. If you view page source, you see it doesn't display the echo command or the PHP itself. It just generates the string of text. Alright, so now let's go back to to our text editor. Alright, so that's a string, and we went over how to concatenate strings, things of that nature in the previous episode. So what else can PHP work with? Well, PHP can work with numbers. In particular, it can work with integers and floats. And let me show you what the difference between those are. Alright, so we're gonna go create another variable. We're going to call this one y. We're going to assign it the value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so with integers, this is an integer. An integer is a data type that has no commas or decimal points, and it does not require to be in quotation marks. It could just be outputted like that. All right, so when you want to echo an integer, you do it the same way as you would a string. Let's take a look at that, and you see it echoes it right there. It's always good to put a BR tag there, so that way we're going to put a BR tag. HTML can be embedded obviously in PHP, and HTML tags are like strings, so you would need to put them in quotation marks when you try to echo them out to the screen itself. So we save that. Let's go back to the browser, refresh that, and now it brings it to a new line. When we look at the page source, you see it's still there. Welcome to this episode, BR tag 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alright. Alright, so now let's look at let's see if we can check out the data type itself. So in order to check out a data type, we're going to use a built-in function in PHP, which is var dump. So we're going to var dump. We have to use, and then we're going to put in a variable. So let's see what happens when we do this. What this is going to do is going to let us know what type of data type the x variable is. So let's see what happens there. So it says it's a string. Alright, just put in a BR tag just to clean that up. Alright, so the var dump function outputted this information. It's a string data type, has 23 characters inside of it, and then this is what it has. Welcome to this episode. All right, so that's what the var dump did for that. Now let's take this, copy, and now let's use that for the y variable, and let's see what it outputs to us then. It says it's an integer, and then it puts in there what the integer is itself. All right, so now let's go on and let's look at what a floating point number is. A floating point number, or a float, is a number that has a decimal point in it. So let's take a look at let's create another variable. Create this one as w. Assign the value of 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 5, 4, 6, whatever. All right, so semicolon. So now we just created a float with the decimal point. We're going to save that. Let's put a all right, so now let's var dump w, and let's also echo w, and put in the echo okay. So let's see what comes up from this. All right, so when we echo it, it echoes the float in that manner, and then with the var dump, it shows you that it's a float. So we have the string, integer, and float. Okay, so that's what we have there for that. Okay, so now the next thing we have is Booleans. Booleans in PHP or in programming languages is basically just true or false. So, you know, if you're trying to equate a value or check a condition, you know, to see if something exists or not, you would typically use a Boolean, which is true or false. We're going to learn more about those in a later chapter, but, you know, they tend to be something that you use a lot within programming languages. So, for instance, if we're going to do something like, let's create another variable, and then we're going to call this one yes, right? We could, you know, use a more descriptive name. We're going to assign it the value of true. This is a built-in thing in PHP, so you don't need parentheses. If you put parentheses here, it'll give you something different. It'll give you a string, but we want the Boolean value versus a string value. So we're going to have that there, and then we're going to create another one. Might as well create null. Is assign the value of false. Okay, so now let's copy that. Let's put that down there and put yes, and then no. Let's see what comes up now. So Boolean true, Boolean false. So that's what that is. So the next type of data that we can work with in PHP is an array. Arrays are great because they are like folders, file folders, or a file system where you can store multiple variables and snippets of information that you can gather from your application or from a database or things of that nature. Variables are important, and arrays are very important within PHP and most programming languages. So let me show you just real quick what an array looks like. There are two types of arrays, and I'll go into more depth on what arrays are in another tutorial, but I just want to give you a brief example. Arrays really do need a separate video since there's two types. But let me just show you a brief example of an array. create some space for ourselves, and then we are going to create a variable cars, right? And to that variable, we're going to assign it the value of an array. And in the array, we need to use parentheses and with a semicolon, as always. You give it a couple of values, so then they can be comma separated lists. So we're using cars as an example, so let's pick out some nice cars. So I'm going to put B and W, comma separated list, another parentheses, Lexus, okay, Porsche. Okay, so that's the array that we're putting. This is an indexed array, so we can var dump this information to see what we get. So let's var underscore dump, and we're going to use the cars array. Cars array. We're going to put in that semicolon at the end to save our file. Let's put in a BR tag here. We could put in a few. Okay, so here we see we have an array with 3 items. So with arrays, this is an indexed array. It's a numerical index. These are like key and values. And then there's an associative array, which we'll talk about in another episode. But we have the array with 3 values. The 0 index, when counting in PHP, you start with the number 0, not 1. So in the first position, 0 position, we have a string with 3 characters in it, and that's the BMW. In the second position, which is really number 1, we have a string with 5, and then in the third, which is number 2, we have a string with 7. All right, so that's that. All right, so now we have the arrays there. The next part that we have, let's really try to get some space here. The next type of data that we have within PHP is an object. An object is stores data and information on pretty much how to operate with that data. So you typically start off with a class name. So you have a class, and then you can start off with you have to give your class a name. So we can call it house, right? And then you use your curly braces, give yourself some space there. The benefit of using classes, this is going into object-oriented programming, is it gives you a way to have more modular code for your applications or websites, and it makes maintaining them a lot easier to do and debugging them a lot easier. It uses properties which are similar to variables, and it uses methods which are similar to functions. And functions I'll go into in another episode, but I just wanted to give you a brief demo of what a function, what a method is inside of a class, inside of an object. All right, so we're using the class house. We're creating the class house, and inside of it we're going to create a method which starts off with the function, and we're going to give it a name. So we can say we can call it, we're just going to call it house for now. You really shouldn't do this, but you can use the same name. We can do that. We'll give ourselves another opening and closing curly braces, and then inside of it you can use the this operator, or the this with the arrow, which is going to then we're going to say type is assigned the value of single family home. All right, so that is a method inside of a class, and this is just going into the object-oriented programming. And this really does require another tutorial series just to go over this in depth. But I just wanted to show you what an object was, since it is a data type. So we're going to give it, we're now going to create an object. We're going to instantiate it. And then we're going to call it out. We're going to show it in the browser itself. So now let's instantiate or call it out. All right, so in order to do that, we have to create a variable outside of the class itself. You see, these are the opening and closing curly brackets. You should always make sure they line up. That's why I like this Atom text editor, because it highlights the opening and closing tags. So we're going to give this a name, and we're going to call it single fam. And single fam is going to be assigned the value of new. You have to create it as a new one, and then we're going to say house like that, and then close it off. And then from there we can echo it out. Echo, and then we're going to do single. See, my text editor has autocomplete, so that is good. And then you're going to do this. We're going to put in the type over here with a semicolon. All right, so we have the echo statement with the actual, we're calling out this variable that has the value of new house from the class. And then we're going to see what happens. And we're going to save it. And we're going to refresh. Single family home. All right, so we should put in a BR tag there as well. So we're going to echo single family home. All right, so if we had that as a multi-family home, it will come out as that. All right, so this is just a very basic description of what an object in PHP is. It's a very long topic to discuss, and I didn't really do it justice in this demonstration, but I just want to give you a brief introduction to it, since it is a data type within PHP. So what we did was we created a class of house. We have a method inside of there, and then inside the method we're using the this variable, and then giving it the type, and then multi-family home, and then outside of it we're instantiating the object itself, and then creating a new object, and then we're going to echo it out to the screen. So we already covered that. Now there are some other types of data types like null and resource, and what I'll do is I'll demonstrate the null data type real quick. All right, so null pretty much is something that has nothing inside of it, nothing at all. So like we have here in the top, we have, I'm going to use my mini map, we have the x variable, right? So we can still use it. So we can do echo x, right? And then let's use this over here. Copy, just so we can give ourselves some space. All right, welcome to this episode. See, the x variable is still usable. It's in the global scope. And I'll go into global and local scope in another episode, because this one's getting kind of long. But basically, the x variable is still available because we're in the global scope. We're not inside of a function. We're not inside of a class, things of that nature. But now, let's say I wanted to empty that. You could always just do this. We can assign x a new value of null. And then we can do the var dump x in that manner. And let's see what happens also when we echo X as well. Use this. Okay, so null. All right, so what happened when we tried to echo it? Nothing came out because it's empty. All right, so there's no value here because we nullified the value of x, the variable of x, to have no value. It's completely empty. All right, and when we var dumped it, it gave us the data type of null. All right, so in this episode, we covered a lot. We're over 20 minutes at this point, so I don't want to make this a marathon episode, but we covered strings, integers, floats, we covered arrays, we covered Booleans, which is true and false, objects, and we covered the null data type. These are some of the things you can do with PHP, some of the type of information you can process. The numbers are good for calculations, obviously, for adding things, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. The strings are good for, outputting strings of text. And obviously the Booleans are good for conditional statements, which we'll go over in a later episode. Objects are good to create modular code within your website or web application that's easily reusable, able to debug it, and it's just a great way, to code. You're going to find a lot of object-oriented programming in web applications today. And then we covered also the null. So hopefully you found this episode helpful. If you have any thoughts, ideas, or suggestions on types of training we should do, let us know in the comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe, since I'll be introducing new tutorials on PHP development and how to use it for your websites. Thanks again, and don't forget to subscribe. Take care.